Let's say you have a lot of money. Not a little bit of money, a lot. More than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. And now you have a problem that regular people don't usually think about. Where do you put it? You could put it in your own country's bank. But what if your government decides tomorrow that it wants a bigger piece of what you have? What if there's a new law, a new tax, a political crisis, or simply a new leader who doesn't like people like you very much? What if the economy crashes? What if the currency, meaning the money your country uses, suddenly loses its value? What if one morning you wake up and half of what you owned yesterday is simply gone? Rich people think about these things constantly. Because when you have a lot to lose, you spend a lot of energy making sure you don't lose it. And for a very long time, for over 100 years actually, the answer that rich people, powerful people, and nervous governments kept coming back to was the same. Switzerland. Always Switzerland. A small landlocked country in the middle of Europe, famous for mountains, chocolate, watches, and apparently holding the financial secrets of half the world. Today, we're going to understand why. How Switzerland became the world's favorite place to keep money. What makes it so special? And whether that reputation still holds today, because the story, as it turns out, has changed quite a bit in recent years. First, let's get the geography clear, because Switzerland's physical location actually matters to this story more than you might think. Switzerland is in the center of Europe. It shares borders with Germany to the north, France to the west, Italy to the south, and Austria to the east. It is completely surrounded by land, no coastline, no sea access. The country is small. Population of about 8 to 9 million people, smaller than many individual cities in the world. But what it lacks in size, it has more than made up for in one specific thing: stability. Switzerland has not been involved in a war since 1815. Think about that date, 1815. Europe has had 2 catastrophic world wars since then, wars that destroyed cities, collapsed economies, killed tens of millions of people, and erased entire fortunes overnight. Switzerland sat in the middle of all of it and stayed neutral. While the rest of Europe was burning, Switzerland was quietly open for business. That is not an accident. Switzerland has a long, deliberate, carefully maintained policy of neutrality, meaning it officially takes no side in conflicts between other countries. It's not in NATO, which is the military alliance that includes the US and most of Europe. It only joined the United Nations in 2002, which is remarkably recent. It is not part of the European Union. Switzerland essentially said to the world very early on, "We are not getting involved in your fights. We are just going to be here, reliable, stable, open." For someone with a lot of money, that message is incredibly attractive, because money hates uncertainty. Money runs away from danger. And Switzerland, for 200 years, has been one of the safest, most predictable places on earth. Now let's talk about the banks. Because Swiss banks didn't become famous just because Switzerland is peaceful. They became famous because of something very specific they offered, something that banks in most other countries did not: secrecy. Swiss banking secrecy became legally protected in 1934 when Switzerland passed a law, the Swiss Banking Act, that made it a criminal offense for a bank employee to reveal information about a customer's account. Not just a professional rule, a crime. You could go to prison for telling someone who had an account at your bank how much was in it, or even that the account existed. This was extraordinary. In most countries, banks share information with governments, with tax authorities, with law enforcement. Your government can generally find out what's in your bank account if it needs to. In Switzerland, that door was essentially locked from the outside. Wealthy people from around the world took notice immediately. If you were a businessman in a country with an unstable government, you opened a Swiss account. If you were a politician who had money you didn't want anyone to ask questions about, Swiss account. If you were a royal family member, a dictator, an aristocrat, a movie star, a crime boss, and yes, all of these people used Swiss banks, the answer was the same. Switzerland will keep your secret. Now, why did Switzerland pass this law in 1934 specifically? The official reason was to protect Jewish people and others in neighboring Germany, where the Nazi government was rising to power and actively trying to identify and seize the assets of Jewish citizens. By making it criminal to reveal account information, Swiss banks could protect their customers from foreign governments demanding to know who had money there. That is the official reason, and it is likely partly true. But it's also true that Swiss banks had been attracting foreign money for decades before 1934, and the law helped protect a business that was already very profitable. The timing was good for Switzerland in more ways than one. Let me give you a sense of how much money we're talking about, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. At its peak, Switzerland was managing roughly a third of all the private wealth held outside of people's home countries worldwide. One country, the size of a small region, managing 1/3 of all the money in the world that rich people had moved abroad. Today, that number is still enormous. Switzerland manages an estimated $2 to $3 trillion in offshore private wealth. Offshore just means money kept in a country that is not the owner's home country. Swiss banks like UBS and Credit Suisse, though Credit Suisse had serious problems recently and was taken over, became some of the largest and most powerful financial institutions in the world, partly because of this flow of international money. Geneva and Zurich, the two main financial cities in Switzerland, became places where private bankers in very nice suits would meet very wealthy clients in very quiet offices and manage fortunes that most people on the street outside had no idea existed. It was a whole industry, discreet, professional, and enormously profitable. Now, there is a less comfortable part of this story, and it needs to be said clearly. Swiss bank secrecy protected some genuinely good people fleeing persecution, people protecting family money from unstable political situations, business people who had legitimate reasons to keep assets internationally. But it also protected a lot of people who were simply hiding money from their own governments to avoid paying taxes. And it protected some genuinely terrible people, dictators who stole money from their own countries and parked it in Switzerland, drug traffickers, arms dealers, people who committed financial crimes on a massive scale and used Swiss banks as a hiding place because the secrecy laws made it almost impossible for investigators to follow the money. For decades, Switzerland quietly allowed this. Not officially, not openly, but the system was designed in a way that made it very difficult to ask hard questions about where the money came from. There is a famous dark joke about Swiss banks. It goes something like, Swiss banks will ask you 2 questions when you open an account. First, how much money do you have? Second, would you like a chocolate with that? They didn't ask where it came from. And for a long time, that was the whole point. The pressure on Switzerland to change started building seriously in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Other countries, particularly the United States and members of the European Union, were getting frustrated. They were losing enormous amounts of tax money because their wealthy citizens were hiding fortunes in Switzerland and not declaring it at home. The U.S. in particular came at Switzerland hard. In 2008 and 2009, American authorities went after UBS, one of Switzerland's biggest banks, with serious legal pressure. They accused UBS of actively helping American citizens hide money and avoid taxes. The case was big, public, and damaging. UBS eventually paid a fine of $780 million. And this was the moment that shocked the banking world, handed over the names of thousands of American account holders to U.S. authorities. Swiss banking secrecy had just cracked. For the first time, a Swiss bank had revealed customer information to a foreign government. After that, things changed quickly. Switzerland signed international agreements on tax transparency. It joined a global system called the Automatic Exchange of Information, which means Swiss banks now automatically share certain account information with the home countries of their customers. The wall of secrecy that had stood since 1934 started coming down piece by piece. Switzerland still has strong privacy protections. Your neighbor cannot find out what's in your Swiss bank account. But the days of a corrupt politician hiding stolen millions in Switzerland and being completely safe from investigation, those days are largely over. Not completely, but largely. So if the secrecy is mostly gone, why do rich people still use Swiss banks? Good question. And the answer is actually more interesting than just secrecy. The first reason is stability. What we talked about at the beginning. Switzerland is still one of the most politically and economically stable countries in the world. The Swiss franc, the currency Switzerland uses, is one of the most stable and reliable currencies on earth. When financial crises happen elsewhere, money still tends to flow towards Switzerland as a safe place. Old habits and old trust die hard. The second reason is quality of service. Swiss private banking is genuinely excellent. These banks have been managing wealthy people's money for generations. The expertise, the professionalism, the range of services, it's among the best in the world. Rich people don't just want their money kept safe. They want it managed, invested, and grown. Swiss banks are very good at this. The third reason is legal structure. Even without absolute secrecy, Switzerland still offers legal structures, certain types of accounts, foundations, and trusts that provide real privacy and protection within the law. Not hiding from tax authorities anymore, but protecting assets from other kinds of risk, divorce, lawsuits, business disputes. Wealthy people have many reasons beyond taxes to want their finances structured carefully. And honestly, the fourth reason is reputation and habit. Switzerland has been the trusted address for international wealth for so long that it has become almost a reflex. When a family has been banking in Geneva for 3 generations, they don't just switch because the rules changed a bit. Trust, once built over 100 years, doesn't disappear overnight. There's one more thing worth mentioning. Switzerland is not the only place rich people use anymore. The world of offshore finance, keeping money outside your home country, has expanded significantly. The Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, the British Virgin Islands, Monaco. These places all compete for international wealth with their own versions of favorable tax rules, privacy protections, and financial services. Some of these places make Switzerland look almost strict by comparison. The Cayman Islands, for example, is a tiny group of islands in the Caribbean with a population of around 70,000 people, and it is the registered home of over 100,000 companies. That number is not a typo. More companies registered than people living there. Most of those companies exist entirely on paper, set up to hold assets, reduce taxes, or separate money from its original owner in ways that are technically legal, but sometimes feel very creative. The world of where rich people keep their money is large, complicated, and constantly shifting to wherever the rules are most favorable. Switzerland is just the most famous address, the one with the best branding, you could say. So what does all of this mean for regular people, for the 99% of us who are not moving fortunes across borders? Well, a few things worth thinking about. First, the amount of money that moves through offshore accounts and tax-friendly countries represents an enormous amount of tax that is not being collected by governments. Some estimates suggest that globally, governments lose over $400 billion every year in tax revenue because of offshore wealth. That is money that could go to schools, hospitals, roads, public services. Instead, it sits quietly in accounts in Geneva or the Cayman Islands. Second, and this is important, not everything about international banking is bad or illegal. Many legitimate businesses operate across countries and need international banking. Many people have genuine, legal reasons to hold assets abroad. The system is not simply evil. It's complicated, like most things involving money and power. Third, the rules are genuinely changing. The world is more transparent than it was 20 years ago. International cooperation between tax authorities is real and growing. It is harder today to simply disappear money into Switzerland and forget about it than it was in 1990. Not impossible, but harder. Switzerland is still Switzerland, still beautiful, still calm, still reliable. The mountains haven't moved. The chocolate is still good. The watches still work perfectly. And the banks are still there, still managing trillions of dollars, still sitting quietly in the center of Europe with that very particular Swiss combination of discretion, professionalism, and the kind of calm that only comes from 200 years of not being involved in anyone else's wars. Rich people still go there, maybe not to hide things the way they once did, but to be taken care of professionally in a place that has been taking care of money longer than most countries have existed in their current form. There is an old saying, I'm not sure who said it first, but it feels very Swiss, that goes something like, banks are places that will lend you an umbrella when the sun is shining, and ask for it back when it starts to rain. Switzerland figured out long ago that the real business was not the umbrella. It was making sure it never rained on their clients in the first place. And that brings us to the end of today's session. Most people quit because progress feels invisible. They practice for a few days, don't see results, and stop. But fluency doesn't work like that. It grows quietly, in the background, through repetition, patience, and discipline. So if you're still here, that means you're doing something most people won't. You're staying consistent. And that is exactly what creates real change. Keep going. One day, the English that feels difficult today will feel natural. And you'll realize this small daily habit changed everything. If this lesson helped you, a like or subscription means a lot. I'll see you in the next one.